Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, September 20th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Florida job. There's been a lot of talk around it. Well, when is Billy Napier going to be let go, or is he going to be let go this year? Who would possibly take over for him in the interim, and then who would take over for him in the long term? And then finally, how good of a job is it actually? And I'll break down all of my thoughts on that in the first segment. Then we'll get into a little bit of a week 4 whip around. We had an absolute splattering yesterday by South Florida against App State. We also have a number of other games coming up this week that I want to break down for you guys that are going to be a ton of fun one way or the other. Then we'll get into some players and coaches under a microscope going into week 4. I think the guy that takes the cake might be the offensive coordinator for Michigan, and I'll break down exactly what I mean with that. Then we'll get into my best bets for this week. Already off to a rough start. Missed out on yesterday's by literally a missed extra point, but hoping we can bounce back. Got 8 more for you guys today, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of a weekend wrap up. All the headlines that didn't necessarily have a chance to get to, we will get to today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can click that little $sign, add your name, add any comment, question you'd like. It will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be very interactive, so utilize that, and we can have a fun back and forth show here. But let's go ahead and jump right in here, because a lot is happening down at Florida right about now, and a lot of it is happening behind the scenes, and there are some fans that are getting a little bit restless about what is going on with Billy Napier going forward. I said earlier this week I did not think he was going to be on the flight to Starkville. I think he's probably getting on that flight right about now. So he absolutely will be on that flight. He absolutely will be on the sideline coaching them this upcoming weekend. And people have some questions, a number of different questions, mainly, when is all of this going to happen? You know, when is he going to be let go, if he is let go? Because I think there's a number of things that need to be figured out behind the scenes before that's a real possibility. That being said, I'd be a little bit surprised if he was to make it through the year. I'd be a little bit surprised, especially if he was to make it through December, through the end of the year, and then a couple of days after that. So we'll see what happens here. Obviously, quite a ways to go in the season, and we'll see how Florida can handle it. But why is he not? Why is it hard to let him go right now? Why is it difficult to pull the trigger right now instead of having to pull the trigger down the road? And the biggest one is a lot of stuff that has very little to do with football, frankly. So Florida has a interim president right now, Kent Fuchs, who was actually their president, and then someone else came in. Didn't necessarily work out, so he is taking over in the interim while they find someone else. That is something that is going to put this at a very, very tough spot. Now, having someone that has been the president before definitely does help this, helps it kind of push it along, and you have people behind the scenes that know him and kind of want to get this done. That being said, you're likely not making one of these big-time hires with an interim president in place. That's just probably not going to happen. And I think there's a number of different things that kind of go into this, but at the end of the day, I think, here, let me see what Anthony's got to say. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different pressure around this program, and I think a lot of it has very little to do with this program, right? It's a lot to do with what Miami is doing and what Mario's doing, and then over at Florida State, although this year has been downright terrible, this is a program that is obviously moving in a better direction than Florida has been recently, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. You know, it's not just about what's going on at Florida, but there are tons of hurdles over there too. I can promise you that, Anthony. But the other one is Florida's AD, Scott Strickland, is a guy that is just on the hot seat right now. He is someone that it tends to be thought, at least around Gainesville, that once that interim president is out and a new president is in, he will no longer be the AD there. So you probably don't want him making your college football head coaching hire if he's going to be out the door by the time you have a new interim president. So it's one of those things where I don't know how much stuff has to happen behind the scenes or on the football field for this to happen, but there's a reality where Billy Napier loses every single game going forward, and their hands are just kind of tied. They can't necessarily do anything by the end of the year. And then there's also other parts of this, which is Billy Napier has built a staff that is just not good enough. I think a lot of Florida fans understand that, and it's been something that has been on full display for a number of other big-time games, including that Miami game to start the season. there's not a guy that is going to be able to take over this team and have the same effect that you want them to have. Now, they do have people that are very experienced in the head coaching space or just in general in the world of football, like Ron Roberts. They hired him as the defensive coordinator. It hasn't necessarily been all that pretty, but he is also a very old school type coach. He is a Nick Saban type coach where he's going to get on his guys a little bit. Doesn't necessarily bode itself well for a guy that's taking over halfway through the year and needs his guys to rally around him. It's not necessarily easy to do if you're going to be that type of approach. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong approach. It just means usually those coaches that do that have been at that program for quite some time and have built up some of that equity that Ron Roberts might not have around Gainesville right now. And then you have Dan Enos, who's also on the staff. He probably wouldn't be able to take over either. He's a special assistant right now. Getting him all the way up to head coach would be very tough, and he's also been fired twice as an offensive coordinator. So you're in a spot where not only is the behind the scenes an absolute nightmare, so you can't necessarily fire this guy because you don't have a real president right now. You might not even have a real AD right about now. And then on the in the side of what's going on in the football program, who's going to take over for him? Who's going to be the guy that takes over for him for the rest of the year? Now, I do think there are options outside of the program that could come in possibly, but it's going to be a lot harder to figure that out, and you're going to want to wait a lot longer to do that because you're going to have to get someone to sign on for multiple months of their life. It's going to be really interesting how that works out, but frankly, I think Billy Napier could lose every single game going forward, and they would still be in the same position where they would be asking, can we really fire him right now? And then the other part of this that I want to talk about real quickly is kind of just who would they hire after this? Who is the person that they would go after? Who is the person that they would touch on after this goes down? And the name that's always popped up is Lane Kiffin. I think everyone understands that this is probably one of the biggest names in the coaching market, particularly one that is not necessarily at what we call a destination school. Maybe Ole Miss is for Lane Kiffin, but at least historically, this has not been a destination school. Lane Kiffin is trying to change that in a lot of ways, has done an incredible job over there, and I think one of the things that kind of gives me pause about this, I think he would be incredible over there. I don't know if Florida is, I don't want to put it that way. I don't know if Florida has the facilities right this second to where he is willing to jump ship from what he has at Ole Miss. I think what he has at Ole Miss is really, really incredible, and I think what he has at Ole Miss is consistency and stability that probably wouldn't be at Florida. And also, the NIL facilities are not necessarily where they are at Florida that they need to be, and they definitely aren't where Ole Miss's is. So that's the real question. Are you willing to meet Lane Kiffin halfway? Are you going to have all the things in place where he's leaving a job where, hypothetically, he can compete for SEC titles, he can compete in the playoff, and he can possibly compete for national titles? Why would he give all that up if there's not reassurances of everything at Florida has been fixed in the terms of NIL, in terms of having a real president, in terms of having an AD that's going to be there for a long time? All of that stuff has to be figured out, or Lane Kiffin has really no reason to leave where he's at. And then the other person that people have talked about is Eli Drinkwitz. And I think this is somewhat of a similar situation. Now, Missouri is a little bit below Ole Miss, at least in my mind, but it's definitely making its way up the ranks right about now. And I think the other part of this is Eli Drinkwitz has a level of control, hypothetically, power inside that state that really does matter. He leveraged his power, his position in that state to get NIL laws changed. He is not going to be able to do that in Florida, and he absolutely is going to have tons of more people to answer to at Florida. It's not to say that Florida is not the better job, and that's something I'll get to here in a second. It's just to say those two guys have very, very good situations right now. Florida is a little all over the place right now. I don't know if they'd be willing to hang it up where they're at and say, yeah, I'll sign on to this Florida program if there's not stability behind the scenes. So it's not to say Florida can't be an incredible job, and it's not to say, especially not to say, that Florida isn't one of those jobs that is probably better than Missouri or better than Ole Miss. It's just to say right now they're not operating at 100% capacity, and I think that's the big problem. You have a Florida job that is downright incredible. If you are operating the way that they are capable of operating, you have everything right there. You're going to have a great NIL fund, and maybe it's just you get the right head coach in there, all that stuff starts flowing in. Maybe that's really the only holdup. I tend to believe it's a little bit deeper than that, but possibly if you get the right guy, you can move forward. But at the end of the day, this right now, Florida right now is not near where Florida can be and not near where they need to be if they want to pull in the guy that they want to pull in. So there's other guys that they can, absolutely. And Florida job is one of the best in the country, no doubt about it. I mean, top 12, top 10, however you want to cut it. The reality is right now, it's not near that. It's not at the place that it needs to be to pull a Lane Kiffin, to pull an Eli Drinkwitz. And now there's other options out there. Alex Golesh at South Florida is absolutely incredible, although I think Florida would be a little bit scared to hire from the G5 ranks again. And then you have guys like Glenn Schumann. You have guys like the UGA DC. You have guys like James Franklin that absolutely could be in on this conversation. The problem is James Franklin, whether it's James Franklin or Matt Rule or Eli Drinkwitz or Mike Gundy or Matt Campbell, whoever it is, all of those guys want to be playing in the playoff. All of those guys want to be coaching into December, into January. You're not going to be able to get anything done before then. And also, before then is early signing day. It's when the portal opens, and maybe for some of these coaches that you want after the portal closes, because they might be coaching deep into this playoff run. So it's one of those things where Florida has a million different things they have to get over. They have to get over what's going on behind the scenes with their president and their AD. That has to be fixed before this happens, likely. They have to figure out a lot of the NIL structuring that has been a little bit out of whack right now, and a lot of people are well ahead of them in. They also need to figure out just the scheduling of this all. It's an absolute nightmare to hire a coach in the month of December right now because there's too much going on. If you try to hire James Franklin and he's coaching through a playoff, he's not going to have conversations with you. Maybe you can get in the room with his agent, but the reality is this is a coach that has his first shot at a big-time win. He's not going to go down to Gainesville, Florida and hear out a job offer, at least not in the short term. Now, he would at the end of the season, and then you could figure out where you stand, but the reality is the scheduling of all this makes it an absolute nightmare to make this hire. And there's a million different things that make it a nightmare. So the reality is Billy Napier is probably okay for the next little bit. And I don't really know how quickly that could change. Maybe if they get blown out this weekend against Mississippi State, people will just have no patience left and they let him go and they figure out what they need to do on the back end. But the reality is with recruiting and with all of this stuff baked into all of these conversations, there's not a lot to be done. If you want a Lane Kiffin, if you want a Matt Rule, if you want an Eli Drinkwitz, a James Franklin, you're going to have to wait a little bit. You're going to have to wait until the end of the year at the very least, and then maybe into the playoff a little bit. And you're going to miss out on recruiting. You're going to miss out on the portal. You're going to miss out on a million different things. None of this is to say that they absolutely should keep Billy Napier. They probably shouldn't. I tend to believe he will be fired by the end of the year. I think they'll get someone else in there, but the reality is right now, Florida is not at a spot where they can just be pushing him out the door and saying, we'll figure it out on the back end, because they don't have an interim. They don't really have an AD that they feel comfortable making this hire. They have an interim president. They have an NIL fund that is a little bit all over the place right now behind the scenes, and they have a lot of coaches that are really incredible, which means they're going to be coaching deep into the postseason. So there's just a million different hurdles for Florida to pull this off, and I think they're going to get a good coach at the end of this. I think they're going to be more than fine in this Billy Napier situation that has been eerily like the Tom Herman situation at Texas, but I can get into that another time if you guys want. But it's one of those things that they will likely get rid of Billy Napier. I think they can get a really good coach in there. It is going to take them time. They have a ton of hurdles they have to get over before they can make that final great hire, and maybe it is Lane Kiffin. I'm a little bit skeptical of that, but maybe it is Lane Kiffin. Maybe it is Eli Drinkwitz. Maybe it is James Franklin, and that would be a great hire, I think, in all the circumstances. Maybe it's Marcus Freeman, who's, I believe, Carl Reed threw out there, which I think would be a great hire as well. You're going to have to wait a while to get those guys. So Florida fans, just strap in a little bit. It's not to mean, you don't have bright days ahead of you. Doesn't mean there's not light at the end of the tunnel. It's just to say, as of right now, there's not many ways to get out of that tunnel. Until you have a lot of fixes in the behind the scenes game, you're going to have a lot of things that are just going to be frustrating for a little bit. But at the end of the day, you will probably get a new coach. You will probably be able to turn the page and move forward. It's just going to take a little bit longer than fans might like. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about all the games that are going on this weekend that we haven't gotten a chance to touch on throughout the week, as well as the game that happened yesterday that did not go the way that I thought it was going to go. So we'll break it down right after this. So stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Florida job that is being very mysterious right about now. We will obviously keep you updated as it goes on, but it might take a little bit to get that new head coach down there in Gainesville, Florida. But let's get into a little bit of a week 4 whip around. We have a number of things that I want to get to, including a couple of games that are going to happen this upcoming weekend, and then we got to get to the game that happened yesterday. So let's jump in here, and this game was crazy. There were a number of different things that happened in this game that I did not expect by any means, and probably the biggest one was the score. South Alabama just railroads App State 48-14, and this was one where I had the over in this game, and it was 62.5. So I missed this by a missed extra point. Very tough start to the weekend for the best bets, but we will get you the rest of them later in the show, and hopefully they go a little bit better than this one did. This was a very, very interesting game, one that App State just had absolutely no answer from the very start to the very end. Gio Lopez was all over them all night. He went for 16 for 24, 154, and 2 touchdowns through the air, 7 carries, 105 yards, and a score on the ground. He was all over the place, was absolutely incredible. In fact, South Alabama ran for 320 and 5 touchdowns on 43 carries. So they just battered them. They ran the ball down their throat the entire day, and now the question becomes, how impressive was that win for Clemson? How big of a deal was it that Clemson went in there and absolutely tore them to pieces? Because this defense does not look very good. It looks like it's a little bit all over the place, and we'll get into Clemson here in a little bit, but one of those things that we'll have to be watching for this weekend, maybe that Clemson win and maybe that Clemson offense is not quite what they showed us against App State. Then we got Florida against Mississippi State, and man, if you want to watch a gross football game, tune into this one. This is going to be just hard to watch in a number of different ways. Now, I'm going to be watching it, don't get me wrong, because I want to see how all this goes down, but Florida is favored by 6 points in this game. 58.5 is the over-under, and I think there's one of those things where Florida's got to be able to pick a quarterback in this game. I understand you want to get both guys run, and frankly, I think Mertz would be the better option in this atmosphere with all the different variables. But on the other side, again, as we've talked about on here, Billy Napier is not in the position where he can just make football decisions. He has to be able to cater to this fan base just a little bit, and I would argue that at least the majority of the fan base would rather see G.J. Lagway out there. So we'll see what happens with that. On the Mississippi State side, it's all about that tempo. They're going to be able to at least try to speed up that Florida defense, and we'll see what happens right now. Frankly, I'm having a hard time seeing Mississippi State beat just about anyone in the SEC, so I am going to lean Florida in this game, but this is one of those that you're in between a rock and a hard place. I have no desire to pick this game one way or the other. I do think they get a win. I do think Billy Napier stays safe just for a little bit longer, but man, if you tune into this one, just might want to cover your eyes just for a little bit to give yourself a little bit of a break. But UCLA at LSU is a very fun game as well. UCLA is reeling right now. There's no other way to put it. They're kind of all over the place. The O-line has been really struggling. Their defense has been all over the place. Gave up 42 to Indiana this past weekend. They have just about nothing going for them. They have TJ Harden in that backfield. They have Ethan Garbers, who has been a quarterback there for quite some time. They have J. Michael Sturdivant on the outside. They can't do any of that because the O-line and the D-line are just not good enough. So they're in a position where they're probably not going to do very well this year, and that was the sentiment going into the year. It might be uglier than we thought it was. I saw that I believe Buffalo Wild Wings over there in LA is giving out free wings if they get a win. They might not get free wings this year, and I'll just leave it at that for the time being, and we'll see what happens with them going forward. I do think LSU's kind of out to make a statement in this game. Everyone talking about that South Carolina game from this past week is all about, South Carolina got hosed. I was trying to pick the right word there. South Carolina got a couple of calls that went against them. LSU got a couple of calls that went for them, and that's why they won the game. And yes, that absolutely played a portion in this game. I think they want to prove to everyone that that was not a mirage, that they are capable of playing those hard-nosed games, that they can come back in. And frankly, I think this might just be one where LSU wins by just a ton in this game, just to flex their muscles a little bit as they head into the SEC schedule. An SEC game that's happening this weekend is Arkansas heading over to Auburn. This one's fascinating for a number of reasons, but mainly because neither of these defenses I have a lot of confidence in. I think both of them can be exposed, especially downfield in the passing game, and both these teams like to do that. Now, Taylor Green does have to take a step forward throwing the ball, and we'll figure out what's going on with him on Saturday, but overall, I think this is one of those games where you're going to have Arkansas that is going to be able to run the ball. That's what they're going to do. They're going to have Jaquindon Jackson. They're going to bring in that fullback that they have that I'm blanking on his name, but incredible player nonetheless. They're going to have Taylor Green on the outside. They're going to be able to run the ball. And then Auburn, with Hank Brown at quarterback, is likely going to be able to throw the ball downfield. Arkansas is without their best cornerback this upcoming weekend. They're going to have to be able to really clamp up on that back end. I don't know if they're capable of doing that. And then Hank Brown, all of this year is kind of an audition, right? He was very, very clean against New Mexico. There were a couple of little mistakes that you'd love to see get better, but as of right now, he's just competing for that 2025 starting job, which sounds kind of crazy, but that's kind of the way Auburn's looking at the rest of the season is, load up, get everything good on tape as you possibly can, and then attack everything in 2025. At least that's the read that I have on it. Maybe they can get a little run going and let then things change, but as of right now, I think they are leaning towards, let's figure out if Hank Brown is the guy going forward. If he's not, we'll go out and get a portal guy and we'll really attack it in 2025. But a really, really fun game here. I think I'd lean Auburn, but this one's going to be really fun and frankly, I think going to be up and down quite a bit. And then you got this game. I called this one yesterday the most fun game of the weekend, and I very much mean it. I think this is one of those games where it doesn't matter who you're a fan of, it doesn't matter how much football you like, you're going to enjoy this one because there's going to be a ton of points in this one. They are going to get after each other quite a bit. Now, they're probably going to get after each other with the run game. Cam Skattebo on one side with Arizona State has been one of the best running backs in the country to this point. Texas Tech has finally gotten Taj Brooks in on the conversation, so they're being able to run the ball really effectively right now, and Baron Morton has found a groove in that offense. A lot of things are going right for both these offenses. Not a lot of things are going right for the defenses. Now, Arizona State is probably in a little bit better of a spot, although Texas Tech did a great job against North Texas past weekend. There are a number of things in this game that just lean me towards this could be a double overtime, triple overtime, 58 to 56 type game. It's going to be all over the place, and we'll see if Arizona State can get that first win in the first game of their Big 12 careers. And then we have a game that's the battle for DFW. Going to be a really, really fun game out there in Dallas for SMU TCU. TCU coming off a very tough loss to UCF where they likely should have been able to close that one out, but fall by 1 point. SMU is coming off just disappointing weeks the last couple of weeks, are coming off a bye after playing in week 0 and then having the bye after a really tough performance against BYU. We'll see what happens with this team, but it sounds like they've settled into Kevin Jennings being their starter at quarterback, and I think that's probably the right decision. I think both quarterbacks are roughly the same throwing the ball. Maybe Preston Stone has a slight edge, but SMU is now in the business of just having as many weapons on the field as possible, and Kevin Jennings is a bigger weapon running the ball than Preston Stone is, so I tend to agree with that, elevating him to the full-time starter. It'll be really interesting to see what he can do on Saturday because technically everything's still on the table for SMU. Technically nothing has changed about what they can do this upcoming year. They just haven't looked near where they need to be for them to be able to pull all that off. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. I'd probably lean TCU in this game, although they really need to find a run game. They got to get Cam Cook more involved, and they had 400 passing yards against UCF. Still weren't able to win that game because when you can't run the ball, you're going to have a really tough time winning those really close games down the stretch. So it's going to be really awesome to watch this game unfold. Again, I'd lean TCU in this game just because SMU has been just incredibly sloppy up until this point, but definitely will be a really fun game, and whoever wins it definitely will have some bragging rights in that neck of the woods. And then you have Miami heading to USF. This is one of my favorite games of the weekend because I think we're going to learn a lot about Miami. We know this USF team is capable of playing with pretty much any team in the country. They went over to Tuscaloosa and played a big-time game against Alabama where they were down 1 point going into the fourth quarter. Miami's coming to their place now, and they have all the motivation in the world to win this game because the reality is they're probably not getting into the CFP with 2 losses, and that's very much what they want to do. Alex Golish and those guys very much want to be in the dance, and they're going to need to get a win here if they want to do that. Now, it's going to be very, very hard to do that. For Miami, it's about taking care of business. It's about proving to yourself, proving to the nation that you are not a team that's going to be able to get up for a Florida or get up for a Florida State, but then play down to a USF or play down to a Wake Forest. I don't even know if they play Wake Forest, but you know what I mean. There are a number of different things that I love this Miami team. I think they have every ability to go to the playoff. This would be the game where I think they would assert themselves as not only a playoff contender, but possibly a title contender if they can go into USF and fully just take care of business, win by 21 points, and look dominant while doing it. So it'll be a really fun game. I tend to believe it'll be closer than that 17 points right there, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be a really, really fun game. I just think USF has just enough to throw at Miami to keep it a little bit close in this one. And then we got Iowa, Minnesota, the battle for the Floyd of Rosedale. Absolutely love this game every time that it comes around. And if you love Big Ten football, tune into this one. The over-under is 35.5, and the under has a real shot of hitting. It's going to be an absolute rock fight. It's going to be really fun to watch this game. Minnesota's kind of been cruising along since that Week 1 win over UNC. That was pretty dramatic and had a number of different things go on in that. But I think they have a number of different things that could go good in this game. I think Minnesota's a very interesting team, and they haven't allowed a point since that game against UNC. They're a dangerous team. Iowa better come in ready to roll because we've seen what this Iowa offense is. It's better. It's not nearly where it needs to be. And if Minnesota can get a couple of takeaways, this thing becomes interesting in a season. And then for Iowa, it's all about just being able to run the ball, being able to take advantage of the clock, and being able to move on to that bye with Ohio State waiting on the other side. Because there's a reality where you lose this game, you come out of that bye, you have Ohio State waiting for you, and then your season's over before you know it. Your season's over when you blink, and you're going to have to figure out where you go from here. So a number of things that go into this game. Obviously, there's plenty of animosity here, which you absolutely love. I tend to believe that Iowa's going to get this one done, but I don't know. This is a game that I would watch very closely because I think Minnesota and Max Brosmer might be able to get this one done, and we will absolutely be updating you on Monday. But a very fun slate of games. I think there's a number that I didn't even have a chance to get to. Bowling Green is heading over to A&M this weekend. Just keep your eye on that one. Just make sure you're watching that one because that one could get interesting in a hurry. We know how good Bowling Green can be against those elite teams. We know A&M can, let those not so great teams walk in the door and take advantage of them. So we'll see what happens on that one. Very, very fun slate of games. We will obviously break them all down next week, but let's get into all the people that are under a little bit of a microscope going into this week. Players and coaches that are going into this week as a little bit bigger than any other week they've had maybe in their career, but definitely in this year thus far. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down all of the games we didn't have quite a chance to get to throughout the week. A ton of really fun games this week to go with all of the marquee ones. USC, Michigan, Tennessee, OU, Utah going over to Oklahoma State, maybe without Cam Rising. So a number of things going into this weekend, but plenty of filler there as well. Let's get into some players and coaches that are under a microscope in week 4. Feels like this is the first week where this really kicks into high gear, where you have a number of guys who aren't necessarily coaching for their jobs by any means, but a lot of fans will make some big opinions after this weekend. I can almost promise you that because that's the nature of college football. But there are a number of people that I'm watching going into this weekend, and I think there are a number of ways that I could go with this. But the two biggest people in terms of what this weekend could be and what could end up being an absolutely crazy weekend, in my opinion, is these two guys. Kurt Campbell and Wink Martindale are the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator for Michigan. I think they have the ability to entirely change the Michigan season on Saturday. And frankly, weirdly enough, I think Kurt Campbell might have more on his shoulders than Wink Martindale because you're changing quarterbacks and because they're looking for an identity over there. You got to buy in. You know what you have in Alex Orji. You know that throwing the ball downfield is not going to be a part of your offense, which means you're going to have to call a beautiful game. It means you're going to have to use motion. You're going to have to be able to get those alignment moving downfield with pulls, or with maybe they're more comfortable in the zone scheme game than you do zone a ton. Whatever it is, he has to be able to execute this at a remarkably high level, because this Michigan offense has been downright terrible, and it's not going to get better throwing the ball with Alex Orji coming into the game. So that means Kurt Campbell's job is going to get that much tougher, especially against a defense that's outkicked their coverage thus far. You're going to have to be able to be on your P's and Q's, because it's going to be really tough to be able to get this offense going, especially if you don't have the passing game that you even had with Davis Warren, which was not much of one either. So he's under a microscope just because he's got to call a good game. He's got to show Michigan fans that this changing quarterback makes sense and that this gives them an identity on offense, and they're going to lean into it. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm very interested to see how he approaches it. And then Wink Martindale, it kind of speaks for itself. The last time he faced an elite offense like Texas, his team got torn to pieces. There's no other way to put it. Steve Sarkisian absolutely took him and his defense to the woodshed. That could happen again with Lincoln Riley easily. It's another elite play caller in this business, and it's another guy that you're going to have to deal with a lot of the same stuff that you dealt with Steve Sarkisian. And then you have Oregon and Ohio State down the road. So it's one of those things that I think a lot of fans will make opinions about Wink Martindale after this game, saying if he can't get it done, they'll say he can't compete with the elite offenses in college football. If he does get it done, then maybe they'll change their tune and feel a little bit better about that Oregon and that Ohio State game going forward. So these guys have a ton on their shoulders. If they can execute at a high level, Michigan can possibly win that game and then turn this entire college football season on its head to what we thought it was the first 3 weeks. And then on the other side, you got D'Anton Lynn. Obviously, his job is going to be huge this upcoming week, but also I think it's been massive just throughout this week overall, because this was probably the most intense week he's had of practice in his career, if I had to imagine. You're going into a place that is going to be physical, is going to test you physically and mentally on Saturday, and you have to make sure all of your guys are ready. I don't know exactly how you do it perfectly. You probably can't, but what you can do is make sure those guys show up every single day and are ready to roll, and he's done a great job of that thus far. This defense has wildly outshot what my expectations were for them thus far, but on top of that, or going forward, it's going to get tougher. You're going to have to be able to tackle really efficiently. You're going to have to be able to not allow yards after carry, yards after contact. You're not going to be able to allow a lot of those things, and it's about to get a lot tougher. You're about to get, punched in the face a lot more often. We'll see if his guys can withstand it and if he can call a defense that is going to be able to withstand all of this attack from Michigan. And I think he definitely has the ability to, but he's going to be tested, and more importantly, his guys are going to be tested this upcoming weekend. And then we have the layup of the day. Nico Iamaleava absolutely is under a big-time microscope. First true road game for this young kid, and it's quite the road game. Going into Oklahoma is a very intense atmosphere. Everyone talked about how intense it was going to be for OU and Texas to walk into these other atmospheres, and it's definitely going to be. Tennessee walking into OU is going to be tough. I can promise you that, especially with a first-year starter at quarterback. It's going to be really interesting to watch this kid. And not only from a football perspective, not only, does he make that pass? Does he do this? How does he walk onto that field? Is he the same guy that he usually is, which is kind of understated, a little bit quiet but confident? Or does he look a little bit timid? Does he look like he's going through things just a little bit slower than he usually does? And then once he gets in the game, is his feet just a little bit shaky? Is he a little bit fast in the pocket? Does he get rid of the ball a little bit faster than you want him to? A lot of things could go wrong for Nico Iamaleava on Saturday. He's looked incredible thus far, and I think a lot of people are thinking he'll be more than fine, and maybe he will be. Maybe he'll light them on fire, and we'll be able to talk about him as a Heisman contender at the end of the week. But as I'm looking at it right now, there is a lot on this kid's shoulders, and Oklahoma knows that this is a young kid coming in. they're absolutely going to jump on you and give you everything you can handle. We're going to learn about as much about this kid as we're going to learn about anyone this upcoming weekend. Cannot wait to see what he can do in Norman. And then they got the head coach on the other side. Brent Venables, funny enough, I think this might be one of the biggest moments in his entire career, particularly his head coaching career. This is his first game in the SEC against Tennessee, against a former coach that he used to coach with, which obviously adds to this fire just a little bit. And you're absolutely going to have a ton of fans that want this to be the moment. They want this to be the moment where they walk into the SEC, they get a big-time win, and they say, see, all of y'all were talking about how we're going to be in for a rude awakening when we get into the SEC. Turns out y'all were. So I think this is one of those moments that it's same thing with Texas, I guess, in a couple of weeks against Mississippi State. Obviously doesn't have the same juice that this one has. Maybe against that in that Georgia game. That's when Texas wants to make their statement. And this is the one that Oklahoma wants to make their statement in. And this might just have to be BV's best coaching job of his career, where you have an elite offense on the other side. You have so many different ways they can attack you. And then you have all the outside stuff. You have all this stuff that files into this game that's going to file into pretty much every single OU game going forward, because they're all going to be SEC games. And we'll see how they handle all of that. But Brent Venables definitely has to coach a absolute masterpiece on Saturday. And if he does, OU fans are going to want to give him a lifetime contract right away. I can promise you that. And then you got Ollie Gordon up there in that state as well. This is going to be an interesting fight. He's going into this game just not playing very good football. He has not been good enough, and now that O-line has not been good enough, and he is a running back that needs a little bit of a hole to open up. Now, he's plenty special with that hole opening up, but the reality is he's going to need an offensive line. If they're not going to be able to block for him, he's not going to be able to make that one move and then break it downfield. He just doesn't have that quite have that ability the same way that a number of other guys in the country do. He is a special player, and frankly, I think Oklahoma State needs him to do this. Utah is going to be able to sit back a little bit, say we can handle the physicality up front, especially if that's the way your O-line is going to play, and then we're going to force Alan Bowman to throw into tight windows. That means there's going to be openings for Ollie Gordon. There's going to be places where he can take advantage of them, and he better take advantage, because if he doesn't, there is going to be a lot of people asking questions about that offense and about this player going forward. And on top of that, it's kind of a contract game for him. He's going up against Utah, one of the best teams in the conference and in the country. He's going up against Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scaley, who are elite defensive coordinators and are very respected at the next level. He could make a lot of money on Saturday, or he could make a lot of NFL scouts question what he is without an offensive line. So it'll be interesting to watch him unfold, but he's definitely a guy that has a lot on his shoulders this upcoming weekend. And then this kid, he probably has a lot on his shoulders every single week going forward, if I'm being honest with you. But this one's interesting because I think coming off that Colorado game, people felt like that's the end-all, be-all. We've seen Dylan Raiola grow up. We've seen him be who he's going to be, and he's going to be incredible throughout the rest of the year. And frankly, I'm a little bit on board with that. I think he's going to be absolutely awesome the rest of the year. He's going to be asked to do more in this game than he was asked to do in Colorado. I promise you that. They are going to be better at stopping the run than Colorado was. They are going to make him throw into tighter windows than Colorado did. So he's going to have to be a little bit better. He's going to have to be crisp, and he's been absolutely incredible thus far. But he's going to have to make a couple of throws. He's going to have to grow up a little bit on Saturday, and he's plenty capable of doing that. I think the talent around him is at a level that Nebraska has not had it in quite some time. But it's one of those things that he's going to have to make that one play. Down the stretch of this game, I cannot imagine tonight that there's not going to be a moment that Dylan Raiola doesn't have to roll up his sleeves and make a play himself, and we'll see if he can do that. I think the kid's talent is off the charts incredible, but it's one of those things that Colorado game had all the hype going into it. This game might not have the same hype. I think it's a tougher job for Dylan Raiola offensively. So we'll see what happens with that. Definitely a really fun game. And frankly, we'll be watching him pretty much every week going forward because of the nature of who he is as a player. And then you got Cade Klubnik. We just talked about that App State game. He's got a lot to going into this weekend. And obviously, it's an NC State team that gave up 51 points to Tennessee. Doesn't mean they're not solid defensively. I think they have a number of really good things defensively. I think Tony Gibson does a great job with that defense, so they could cause problems. And frankly, if that's the App State defense that they were facing, they have to be just a little bit better than that. They have to be just a little bit structurally sound, and they're going to be more than fine. But at the end of the day, NC State is going through a quarterback change. Clemson is favored by 20 points. It should be a game that they can roll in. But at the end of the day, Cade Klubnik is walking into this one as this is kind of the confirmation game. You saw what you saw at App State, and it was incredible. 5 touchdowns, only 2 incompletions. Everything was about as good as you could possibly ask it to be. This is the game where you prove everyone right, where everyone that's been singing your praises, everyone that's been saying Clemson is going to pull away from the conference after this week, like myself, that has been saying that, he's going to have to be able to prove us right this upcoming weekend. And if he doesn't, if he struggles against this defense that was absolutely torn apart by Tennessee, there's going to be the same questions on Monday. So Clemson was able to get that big-time win. They were able to have a little bit of peace around that program. If they don't do well on offense on Saturday, the same questions are going to pop up, and we're going to have to figure out where they go from there. And then finally, the man that's going to be on this list every single week for the rest of the season, Billy Napier. He is going to have to maybe just win every week if he's want to continue forward as the Florida head coach. He might be fired on the tarmac in Gainesville if he does not win this one, and that would be something that is a real possibility, honestly. I don't know how that Florida job is going to go down right now. We talked about that earlier in the show, and it's a lot more complicated than they would like it to be. But overall, it's one of those things that I don't think this is the biggest game in the season for Florida by any means, at least not going in. But right now, the game in front of him is the most important game because you absolutely have to win it. So it's a very interesting thing around there. There are a ton of fans that if they fall in this one, you are never getting them back. They could win the rest of the games on the schedule. They would have all of this pent-up energy against Billy Napier, and it would be really hard to be able to get that back. So maybe if they lose this game, then all of that stuff I talked about in the first segment, all of the hang-ups that I talked about would go away in a hurry, and I tend to believe that would be the case. But we'll see what happens on that front. Obviously, he has a ton of pressure on him, not only this week, but just the rest of the season. But let's take our third break here. When we come back, I got some best bets for you. We got off to a very tough start yesterday, missing out on that over by literally a missed extra point. But we'll get into all of the stuff I have for this weekend right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the players and coaches under a big-time microscope going into this weekend. I tend to believe Nico Iamaleava kind of takes the cake in that respect, but definitely will be interesting to watch all of those guys go to work this upcoming weekend. But let's get into some of my best bets for this weekend, because it was not a great week last week. We went 3-4-1 with that push being that TCU game that had the +1 in, so got a little bit lucky there. But overall, we are 8-1 on the season, perfectly even, and hopefully we'll get on the right side of that this upcoming week. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And there's a number of bets that I like, but I think I might like this one the most. Utah going to Oklahoma State under 52.5. I had worries about this when Cam Rising was healthy. If he's not healthy, then I absolutely love it. I got to be totally honest with you. I think these are two defenses that are going to be able to stop that big-time pass down the field, and these are two offenses that aren't necessarily all that explosive. Dejon Stanley has given Utah a little bit different of a look in that respect, but I don't necessarily think they're going to get into a shootout by any means in Stillwater. I think the Oklahoma State defense has shown a couple of holes, but frankly, if it's Isaac Wilson back there, it's going to be really tough to be able to get his feet under him in Stillwater at night. So, well, not at night, at 4 p.m., but regardless, anytime you're playing in Stillwater, it's going to be really tough, and I think it's going to be a really interesting spot. Oklahoma State is one of those things that this O-line is not playing nearly well enough to feel confident about that offense going into this thing. Ollie Gordon has not gotten his feet under him. I do think Alan Bowman has really answered the bell incredibly well. This is going to be a much tougher test. That Arkansas game obviously gave you much more openings than this Utah team is going to give you. So I tend to believe we're going to have a little bit of a rock fight in this one. I think it's going to be low scoring early. Maybe it opens up a little bit later for one of these teams, particularly I think Oklahoma State, because that's who I have winning. But it's going to be a really fun game. I just tend to believe it's going to be a little bit of a rock fight in Stillwater. This is one that I was waiting for that number to go over 10, but frankly, I might have taken it at 10 as well, because this Georgia Tech team, I think, is so good at just not giving their opponent anything. I think they're so good at just not allowing them to get easy penalties, not allowing them to get short fields in a lot of respects, and running the clock in a way that makes it really tough to blow out them in any week, regardless of who the opponent on the other side is. And then Louisville is coming off 2 games where they haven't really played anyone. They had a bye last week. There's a reality where there's still some of that rust to kick off, especially against one of those good teams in the ACC. You're going to have a really tough time. Now, the other part of that is Georgia Tech has to make sure they don't get out to a tough start, because the reality is, we saw it in the Syracuse game, it's really tough for them to get back in the game. They were able to battle back and give themselves a shot, but wasn't necessarily enough to get it done because of the approach on offense. So we'll see what happens here. I think Georgia Tech's going to have to get out to a lead if they're going to want to even compete in this game, but I do like that 10.5 number. I think they're going to be under that. I think it's going to be a relatively close game, and I do think Louisville will get it done at the end of the day. I just think Georgia Tech does just enough to create problems for them, to slow down the clock, to maybe score a little bit early, and then take advantage at the end of the game. So I do think Georgia Tech is going to be able to keep this one close. I think Louisville likely wins, but give me Louisville by about 6 or 7 points, something like that. And this one is scary. I won't lie to you. I have LSU, LSU minus 23.5 against UCLA. I just think UCLA is not all that good. I'll be totally honest with you. I think a defense that is going to give up 42 points to Indiana, although they're playing really good offense over there in Bloomington right now, they're going to give up a lot of points to LSU. Garrett Nussmeier should have a fantastic day this upcoming weekend, and we talked about it earlier. I think this LSU team wants to make a statement this week. I think they've heard all the noise talking about how the refs handed them that game, and I'm not here to necessarily dispute that by any means, but I am here to say that I think that's pissing off this team. I think they're a little bit mad right about now, and I think they want to make a statement against a team that they absolutely should be able to make a statement against. UCLA is not someone that they're going to be able to really cover these elite wide receivers that are finally getting a little bit healthy, which is great. I think it's going to be an absolute clinic, and I think LSU wins by 30 points in this one, honestly. And then you got Arkansas at Auburn. Over 56.5 is my pick here. I feel pretty good about this one. I think this is going to be a really interesting game because Hank Brown hypothetically could take a step back. He still is a young player against an SEC defense on the other side, but Arkansas missing that elite corner on the outside. There's so many different things that are just leaning me towards points happening in this game. And I think this Auburn team is really solid. I think they have the ability to play solid defensively. I also think Taylon Green and Jaquindon Jackson is an absolute nightmare to deal with. I think it's one of those things that you could have the perfect defense called. If Taylon Green pulls the ball, he could go around the outside and go for 50 yards down the sideline. So it's one of those things that Auburn has plenty of things in place to make those plays against maybe the lower ranked teams that they play, maybe the Group of Five or North Texas that they played last week. I think Arkansas is going to be able to cause enough problems. And then on the other side, I think Hank Brown and this Auburn offense is going to be able to push the ball downfield. I think they come out of the gate really swinging in this first quarter. I think there's plenty of big-time holes to open up in this first quarter, and then we're off to the races. I think this is a really fun game. Another one that I'm watching in terms of maybe we have a double overtime, triple overtime, crazy game in Auburn, Alabama this upcoming weekend. And then the one that I was talking about earlier, Arizona State going over to Texas Tech, and over 59.5 is what I like here. This one's a little bit tougher, but the reality is last week I went against Texas Tech and I got burned because I went with North Texas, was not even close in that game. Now I'm going to go against their defense, and I feel a little bit more confident in that. I think Arizona State has an ability to run the ball that is going to be tough to deal with for everyone that they play. They have so many running backs to throw at you. Sam Levitt is such a tough quarterback that makes life really difficult when he pulls the ball and goes on the outside. It's going to be really tough to fully stop this Arizona State attack. And then on the other side, Texas Tech, I think, has found something. I think they've gotten Taj Brooks involved. They got to get the ball to Micah Hudson more often. He is an elite player and one of those guys that if you're not utilizing him, you're leaving some of what your offense can be on the shelf. But at the end of the day, I think they'll be able to score points. I think this Arizona State defense is going to struggle against Taj Brooks in this running attack, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch this game. It's going to be all over the place, and I tend to believe a little bit of a shootout. And then we got this one. I do think this is going to go under. I think a lot of people are leaning towards the over because of what Tennessee can do offensively. I don't know if Oklahoma can score enough to get to that 56.5 number. I also don't know if Tennessee can get going quickly enough as people think they will, because I think OU is going to have an incredible game plan going into this game. I don't necessarily think it's sustainable for 4 quarters, which is why I have Tennessee winning by 10 points, but I do think it's one of those games where OU just tightens the screws. Maybe Tennessee has no points at the end of the first quarter. This thing is tied 0-0 or 3-0, something like that, and then maybe it opens up throughout the game. But I also think both these offenses are just going to have a little bit of tough sledding early. I think Danny Stutzman in this front for Oklahoma is going to be able to stop the run in the first part of the game, and then it's going to open up down the road. And then OU, that O-line is not going to be able to improve the way that they need to improve going up against this front. This front is just absolutely ridiculous, and if I believe Temple got 3 sacks on OU, I promise you Tennessee can get more this upcoming weekend. So they've gotten a little bit more healthy on that line. It sounds like Branson Hickman might go this upcoming weekend, which would be absolutely huge. But overall, this is one of those games where I think the defenses just totally dominate the game through one half, and then maybe it opens up a little bit in the second. This is one I'm a little bit worried about, I won't lie to you, but I do have Baylor +2 going up to Boulder to play Colorado, and I'm going out a little bit out on a limb, but the way I look at it is Colorado has just walked back into the Big 12 after a long hiatus. They played a certain style of football that really plays into a lot of Big 12 defenses' hands. When you talk about what Big 12 defenses have liked to do over the last 10 or so years, where all of the spread offense, throwing the ball downfield, Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield and all of these guys, they play a lot of drop 8 coverage. They play a lot of guys that drop into coverage and say, we dare you to pass on us. We dare you to throw into these tight windows, and we're going to pick the ball off and take it the other direction. So it's one of those things that's exactly what Colorado does not want to see. They still cannot run the ball. Now, they have Auguste, that is going to play this weekend, so maybe that changes some things. But overall, Baylor's going to do exactly what Colorado does not want them to do, which is say, we dare you to run the ball, and they're not going to run the ball. So I worry about this Colorado offense to be able to get things rolling. I do think they have every ability to win this game, and if they do, I will have a ton of respect for what they did this weekend. I just think it's one of those things where Dave Aranda is going to have his guys ready, and it's going to be a really tough uphill battle. John Napier over 250 passing yards. That's a really tough one. I'll be totally honest with you. John Napier is one of those guys that I think it's a really tough thing to see him throwing for 250 yards any single week. But they are playing a lesser opponent. I think I'd like that, but frankly, I don't know. I think it would be one of those games, I will say, that I think they're playing a lesser opponent, probably want to take him out of the run game just a little bit more to keep him healthy down the road, especially with all the things that could happen for Washington State going forward. So I expect to see a little bit more passing from Washington State, but it is a little hard for me to see him getting over 250 pretty much any single week because of how much he likes to get out and run the ball. But definitely will be an interesting thing to watch there. My final one is over in that USC-Michigan game. This is a little bit of a tough one, but the way I look at this is I think USC is going to be able to score early. I think they're going to have a beautiful first script, the same way Texas did, where a holding call that I don't necessarily agree with took a touchdown off the board in that first drive. I think USC is going to be able to do the same thing. And then on the other side, I think Michigan's approach is going to be to run the ball, going to be to make it really, really tough for USC to be able to stop them. And it's one of those things where I think, especially in the second half, there's going to be a couple of holes. I think Donovan Edwards is going to be able to break a big run. I think Khalil Mullings is going to be able to bruise these guys just enough to where Michigan's going to be able to contribute to this enough. I don't necessarily think they're going to light the scoreboard on fire by any means, but I think USC is going to start pretty quick, and I think Michigan's going to be able to wear USC down and score a couple of points late. So it's one of those interesting games where you see that USC defense playing really well and that Michigan offense playing absolutely terribly, and you would lean towards the under, but I don't know. I think there's enough offense in there. I think Michigan finds at least enough this weekend to be able to score some points. And then on the other side, I have no problem betting it over with USC involved. So going to be a really fun game. Hopefully those bets go a little bit cleaner than they did this past weekend. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we got all of the weekend headlines that we have not gotten a chance to get to. We're going to update you on all of those right after this. So stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Definitely didn't quite go, or definitely didn't start the way that I wanted to with me having the over in last night's game, but hopefully it goes a little bit cleaner throughout the rest of the week. But let's get into all the headlines that we have not gotten to throughout this week. Obviously, plenty of football to talk about, so this is kind of the way I like it, but plenty of things that we have to update you guys on, and I want to start with the ACC. There is a ton going on over there at the ACC, and a lot of things that, with Florida State and Clemson, it's been a little bit quiet as of recently with all of this different stuff happening behind the scenes and a lot of this stuff heading to mediation and a lot of complicated things happening behind the scenes. It's gone a little bit quiet in terms of big-time headlines. That's no longer the case. There is a little bit of there's a thing going around in the ACC realm of possibly changing the revenue split that they have right now, the structure of how they split that revenue to go in align with how much media deal you bring in. Essentially, your media power, your brand power, you will get paid in accordance to that. And it's something that I have to imagine not a lot of people around the ACC are fans of. Now, there are some teams that would get it very nicely. If you're Miami, if you're UNC, I tend to believe you would be number 1 and 2 in this conference if they were to split it this way. And then maybe Clemson and Florida State number 3 and 4, maybe Duke in there at 3, who knows. But at the end of the day, I do think there are some people that would be more than on board for this. They would absolutely buy into this. I also think there's Wake Forest and Boston College and a number of other teams that would say, why would we give up a little bit of our piece of the pie so these two people that are suing our conference can stay in? That's one of those things that you're going to have a hard time convincing a lot of those presidents and ADs to sign on to this. I tend to believe it's not going to happen. It's one of those things that will obviously change over time, and we'll see what happens with it. But overall, it's one of those things that I can't imagine there are a lot of people in the ACC that are, giddy to go to the table and talk to Florida State and Clemson right now, especially if they're saying, yeah, we're just going to take a little bit of the money that you make every year. There's no way that Wake Forest and Boston College are really into this idea. So I question if it's going to happen. We will absolutely update you on it as it goes on, because would be a huge thing for the ACC going forward, keeping those two guys intact, but maybe frustrating some other people in the room. But it'll be really interesting to watch. I just tend to believe it's a little bit more far-fetched as of right now. And then we had Deion Sanders make a little bit of headline this last weekend when he was talking about reporters, talking about NIL, just saying, here, the quote, I'll just read the quote for you. Once upon a time, you guys never attacked college players. Now they're making money, and some of y'all want to be envious and jealous about that. Here's the thing. College players have always been attacked. Tim Tebow was attacked. Aaron Hernandez was attacked when all of that stuff was going on. Johnny Manziel was attacked when all of that stuff was going on. I fully agree that there are certain reporters out there that do not like the current structure in college football. They don't like that college football players are getting paid. They think it's all transactionary, even though it's not, which is a totally different conversation. There are people out there. I'm not arguing that by any means. The idea that the kids before this were not getting torn to pieces is just not true. Now, there's more ability to do that now because of social media, because of all this other stuff that plays into college football now, but the idea that kids before the NIL era were just hanging out and not getting bothered by these beat reporters is just not true. And then the other part of this is I'm fully on board with people calling out what reporters are doing incorrectly if they're really doing something incorrectly. I'm more than on board for that, especially around these kids who have a lot on their shoulders and have a lot of people attacking them from a lot of different directions. Protecting your kids, protecting your players is the number one priority, and I totally agree with that. I would love for him to say some names. I would love for him to sit up there and say, you wrote this specific thing about my player that was not true, and then we can have a conversation about it. Right now, it seems like he's just talking at a grandiose stage about media in general, and I don't know who he's mad at. I don't know who he's going after, and I don't know if that person or this group of people actually did anything wrong. So I would love for him to say, you from the Denver Post or you from this specific website said Shedeur was doing this with his NIL money and he's not. And I think then we could have a real conversation. When you just say you guys are going after these players the way you didn't before, I don't really know what to make of that. So it's one of those interesting scenarios where I tend to agree with a lot of what Deion said in that quote and a lot of what his sentiment was in that quote. I just like him to really do it, really say what that reporter said, and we can have a real conversation about why he shouldn't do that and why it's really messed up what was happening over there. So it's one of those things that I don't really have too much of a problem with what he said. I just think the idea that kids before the NIL era were just living free and clear of all these beat reporters is just beyond not true. But moving forward, John Gruden seems like he might want to get into college football. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but it sounds like the former NFL head coach wants to get back involved in football. He feels like a lot of the stuff that has happened over the past little bit, obviously got fired after some really terrible emails came out around him, and definitely a lot of things that came out around him that were not great by any means, and he resigned in October of 2021, has not returned to football since. So we'll see if he's able to get a job at the college football level. I will say this, I think if he were to get a college football job, it would not go well. I just plainly think that. I think his style of coaching would not work at the college football level. I don't think he has the ability to be able to recruit at a high level. I just think it would be a very, very tough thing for him to do. I think he's a fantastic football mind. I have opinions behind the scenes, that's beside the point. I do think he's one of those guys that would work from a football perspective if he's not the head coach. If you have him as the offensive coordinator and he doesn't have to do too much recruiting and that type of stuff, I think that would make sense. As of right now, I just don't think it would work all that well, and I don't know how many college football programs would be lining up. But at the end of the day, it is a big-time name. It is someone that a lot of people would at least think about, so I have to imagine he'll get some type of job, maybe a low-level job here pretty soon, and we'll see what happens from there, but definitely something to monitor going forward. Something happened in Georgia this past week that we definitely need to talk about. It sounds like Georgia has an executive order to ban the NCAA from enforcing NIL, which essentially just means they can't do anything. Georgia and Georgia Tech and Georgia Southern and Georgia State and all of those teams in that state are allowed to start paying players. They're allowed to kind of open up their pocketbooks and start setting up these really complicated systems that are going to have to be set up by every single program in the country. So they got a little bit of advantage right now. Those two schools right there are going to have the ability to go into rooms with elite recruits and say, we can pay you without any problem going forward over the next little bit. And then you'll have to see what happens with the House settlement, and you'll get into that once that is officially passed. But the reality is, anyone that can get a kickstart on what all of this looks like, get a kickstart on all of this different stuff that is going to come on their plate, it's a win. So these two schools just got a huge, huge boost to their recruiting ability, and not only that, but a huge boost to just figuring out what all of this craziness is going to look like at their two schools, while everyone else is kind of just waiting for that thing to kick in. I tend to believe there are a lot of people around a lot of different states that are having those conversations right about now, but Georgia and Georgia Tech have to be pretty happy about what just happened over there at the Georgia legislature. But let's get into Tennessee, because I have an issue with this little one. Tennessee has added a 10% talent fee to their season tickets going forward starting in 2025, and I got a problem with this. I understand that Tennessee is going to have some of those bills that we just talked about that they're going to have to foot going forward. I totally agree that it's going to be a little bit difficult for some of these athletic departments out there to foot all of these bills. Tennessee is not one of them. I can absolutely promise you that Tennessee is not one of them that is looking at their books right now and saying, we really cannot handle paying these kids. I promise you they are not in that group. There are plenty of people that are in that group, don't get me wrong. Tennessee is just not one of them. And I have hated this for quite a long time, that in college football and in sports in general, really, the buck is always passed to the fans. They understand that we as the fans are willing to pay. We are willing to go into these games because we want to be in Neyland Stadium. We want to be in Sanford Stadium. We want to be in all of these incredible places around the country. We want to be there every weekend, hanging out with our friends, doing tailgating, all of the stuff that makes college football special. So they know that they can pass this off to us, and we'll say, yeah, sure, that makes sense. And I guess if it does go toward getting better players on your team, there's a lot of Tennessee fans that would be more than fine with that. I just think it's one of those things that, why? Why do you have to do this? I know Tennessee does not have to do it. I know a number of teams that are going to do it going forward do not have to do it. So it's one of those things that whenever the fans are capable or able to foot the bill, they absolutely will. I can promise you that, and especially going forward with a number of different things coming on the books, it's going to get a little bit more aggressive. So I have to imagine I'm going to be very frustrated by a number of these different rules going forward, but Tennessee was just the first one to it. So I'm frustrated with them first, but I promise I'll follow suit if others kind of follow suit in this. Apologies. And then we have Pat Narduzzi, because he got fined $5,000 for publicly criticizing the ACC refs. I love this for a million different reasons. I think we need way more coaches talking about what's going on in the ref world, because the reality is it's not going well. There's a number of different things that have to be fixed in terms of what refs are, how they're structured, who they're employed by, a million different things that need to change. you have to have coaches to speak out to say it. You have to have coaches like Kirby Smart, like Pat Narduzzi, like all of these guys that have been in this business for such a long time to say this is not the way it's supposed to be going. The Panthers got 12 penalties, 112 yards, and a come from behind win against West Virginia this past weekend. And there were a lot that were absolutely crazy. I'll be totally honest with you. There were a lot that made absolutely no sense, and one of those that he said after the game, we just beat West Virginia in the backyard brawl, and we beat the officials in one game as well. So it's one of those things that I would love to see more of this. I think we need all of the coaches talking about this in very certain terms, saying we got hosed in this game. We got a little bit, there were a number of calls that went the way that they absolutely should not go, and there are a number of things that need to be fixed about the way we go about officiating going forward. Or you're going to have Pat Narduzzi looking like that quite a few times on Saturday. So going to be an interesting thing. Would love to see a lot of coaches follow suit and then probably get fined in the same way that Pat Narduzzi did. And then we have to talk about the AAC and Air Force. Air Force is one of the teams that the AAC, the American, is going after for their possible expansion going forward. We know that the Pac-12 has taken over a number of teams from the Mountain West, including Colorado State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Boise State. They're looking for a couple more. It doesn't sound like Air Force is on the short list to get in, so they're looking for somewhere else to go. And it sounds like the American is one of the conferences that would be on the short list. Now, one of the big-time questions here is if the American is looking for a new team to add into it, are they worried about these two teams leaving? Are they worried about Memphis and Tulane possibly walking out the door to the Pac-12? And if they are, then this makes a lot of sense. Definitely go out and get these players in. It does sound like if the Mountain West does lose Air Force, by the way, it will take them below that 8-team threshold to be a conference at the FBS level, and I can't imagine they're getting back over that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this develop. I think it's one of those things that there's going to be a lot of movement in the realignment world going forward. The American might be the epicenter for it. So we're going to have to watch them very, very closely. Absolutely love that Air Force is going to the same conference of Army and Navy, so very much like that. But I think it's one of those things that there's going to be a lot of movement at the Group of 5 level, and the Americans probably at the very center of it. Maybe it's adding Air Force, but losing these two guys, Memphis and Tulane, right here. And then finally, a really great piece of news that came out last night that I saw is Chris Lewis, the talented wide receiver for Troy, has officially finished his cancer treatment and he is cancer-free. He was diagnosed with osteosarcoma earlier this fall and has been out since, obviously, dealing with this treatment, and could not be more happy for this kid. Obviously, it was a very scary last little bit for him and his family dealing with all of this different stuff, and osteosarcoma is quite the disease, I won't lie to you. So it's definitely something that they're very happy to be past this part of it, be on the road to recovery a little bit more. Obviously, quite a ways to go, no two ways about that, but obviously love to see this kid back on the right side of things, hopefully working his way back onto the field. Likely will not see him until 2025, I would have to imagine at the very earliest. But obviously, the best news of all is that he's healthy. That's the ultimate news here, and cannot wait to see this guy get it back on the field and do what he loves, which is playing football. So very happy for this kid and cannot wait to see what he can do once he gets back on that field. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really awesome people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC, and we will have you totally covered. Enjoy the games this weekend. It's going to be absolutely incredible to watch all of this stuff go down. I think we might have a couple of big-time upsets this upcoming weekend, so just keep your eyes peeled. Definitely make sure you're watching all the games, and we'll be back here same time on Monday to break down all of the craziness. So I will see you then. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great weekend, you guys.
Let's go.